The OVO fanbase was on cloud 9 when their GOAT finally dropped the highly anticipated Triple S album with his homie PartyNextDoor. The hype was unreal, and they made sure anyone not on the Drizzy train heard about it. But now, the hype train has gone off the rails. Hard. The moment streaming numbers started rolling in, reality hit. When the album first dropped, the numbers skyrocketed, and Drake's diehard fans rushed to flex them as proof that their fave was still on top, even after taking an L to Kendrick Lamar. But what they failed to realize was why people were tuning in. Everyone wanted to hear post-war Drake. They wanted to see if the album was just as mid as they expected, and frankly, it was. No wonder they didn't stick around for a second listen. Now, with numbers plummeting at an alarming rate, Drake and his loyal fan club are in full-blown panic mode. None of them ever imagined a day where a Drake album would underperform this badly, especially not less than 2 weeks after release. What a surreal moment it must be for Drake himself. And judging by the way he's been reportedly crashing out, he's feeling it too. Kendrick fans must be reeling right now, and there's a lot to unpack here, but before we dive into the nitty-gritty, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, if there's one thing Drake's fans hate the most, it's being called out whenever he fumbles. There is no other fanbase in the world that loves pulling the numbers as much as they do. Doesn't matter the argument, their go-to response is, but he's got the most streams. Well, guess who isn't leading the streams anymore? If there was ever a debate about hip-hop's shifting dynamics post-Kendrick beef, that debate is officially over. Not only is this album the lowest rated of Drake's career, but it's also flopping by his own lofty standards. Even as a joint album, the numbers are tanking. The best way to grasp just how bad it's doing is to compare it to every Drake album in the past decade, and trust me, what we discovered is mind-blowing. First off, Triple S logged the lowest first-day streams of any Drake album in the past decade, pulling only a little over 56 million streams. Now, for most artists, that would be insane numbers, but for Drake, that's laughable. For context, For All the Dogs, Drake's previous album, raked in about 108 million first-day streams. That's nearly half the numbers gone. When a top-tier artist sees a 50% drop in their first-day streams compared with their most recent project, that's not just a dip, it's a disaster. It's not something you overlook as a blip because it absolutely isn't. And the worst part? There's no way for Drake and his PR team to spin this. No matter what narrative they try to push, the fact remains that numbers don't lie. If this downward trend continues, Drake is about to get dragged 7 ways to heaven. Well, he's probably used to that by now, but the irony of it all is that Drake was the first to bring up numbers during his beef with Kendrick, bragging about being the undisputed champ because he makes the most sales. Well, that flex didn't age well. Another day, another L. Kendrick's impact is still haunting Drizzy long after the knockout punch. As long as the internet exists, he's never going to stop catching strays. Not only is Kendrick Lamar's GNX still holding strong at the top end of the charts, but it's also outperforming Drake's brand new album, despite dropping months earlier. Do you know how crazy that is? Luther and Not Like Us, to name a few, are still pulling in ridiculous numbers every single day. More than Drake's entire 21-track album could ever dream of achieving combined. And here's the wildest part. Luther is still climbing fast. The song is projected to take the #1 spot on the charts again. Before long, it'll be sitting comfortably above every single track from Drake's Triple S. But you know what's even crazier about all this? Luther isn't even a rap song. It's just as melodic as any track on Drake's project, but the big difference? Quality. Not one song on that joint project comes close to the quality of delivery on Luther, and if you think otherwise, we seriously need to question your taste in music. Do you realize how insane it is for one artist to have 4 uniquely different songs in the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100? That's some next level elite moves right there. Drake must be reeling watching Kendrick take over the charts like this. I mean, he dropped a 21-track album, nearly twice the length of GNX, and not one of those songs can measure up in any metric. That's what you call total domination. Oh, and let's not forget, Kendrick just broke the record as the first rapper ever to surpass 100 million monthly listeners on Spotify. 102 million to be exact, and that number is still climbing every single day. The best part of this massive achievement is that K-Dot never had to compromise his sound or chase trends to make it happen. He stayed true to his artistry, carried the culture on his back, and never switched up. And now he's sitting on 20 million more listeners than Drake could ever muster, even at the peak of his powers. To all the fans who love bringing up numbers every time there's a Drake versus Kendrick debate, y'all can finally rest. Your fave isn't winning the numbers game anymore. He's been retired. So now can we finally admit who the real GOAT is? Kendrick has always bested Drake on any metric over the years. From the quality of music to its impact, he always had the edge. But now the one metric Drake and his fans love to brag about, that's becoming Kendrick's too. Remember during his Super Bowl performance when Kung Fu Kenny reminded us that no matter how much Drake and his team tried to rig the game, they can't fake influence? He was spitting facts. They really can't fake it. I know some Drake fans will argue that nobody can compete with Kendrick right now because of the Super Bowl momentum, and yeah, maybe that's true, but here's the thing. That still doesn't change the fact that Triple S is flopping. Hard. And if you think comparing him to the newly minted king of rap is unfair, well, the album isn't doing any better against any other top tier artists either. Oh, and these ones do not have the supposed Super Bowl momentum. Just like a Bad Bunny in The Weeknd, their new albums are pulling massive numbers, the kind Drake can't compete with right now. And let's not forget, Drake used to flex on these same artists, bragging about being bigger and better than them. Now, the numbers tell a different story. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Now you can see it's not just about Super Bowl momentum. Drake has been surpassed by his fellow elites. And if you really want to see the difference in the quality of music, just take a listen to The Weeknd's Hurry Up Tomorrow. Within seconds, you'll understand why it's outperforming Triple S. That album is a lock for an Album of the Year nomination, and we're not even halfway through the year yet. For those who'd argue there's nothing embarrassing about being outperformed by The Weeknd or Bad Bunny since they're global superstars with more reach than Drake, well, let me stop you right there. Drake isn't even holding his own against artists he's supposed to be bigger than right now. Look at Tyler the Creator's Chromacopia, for example. That project pulled over 80 million first-day streams despite just having 14 tracks. Now compare that to Drake's 21-track album, which still fell over 30 million short, and that's pretty wild. Oh, and to make things worse, these are West Coast rappers dominating Drizzy. Kendrick's boys are having a feast right now. From the quality of music to cultural impact, they've got Drake in a chokehold. If Drake can't even outstream Tyler, then who can he beat for numbers? Gone are the days when he used to flex those same numbers hard. And here's where it gets really crazy. We decided to dig deep in our numbers comparison, and we found out Drake isn't just struggling against today's top tier artists. Even older rappers who aren't of this streaming generation are outpacing him. Take Eminem, for example. His last album outperformed Drake's new Triple S album across nearly every metric. That's insane considering M started his run almost 2 decades before Drake even dropped his first major project. And if you thought the first day numbers for this joint album with Party were disappointing, the second day was even worse, barely hitting 30 million streams. Meanwhile, Kendrick's GNX jumped to over 70 million on its second day, despite dropping out of nowhere with no real promotion. That tells you everything you need to know. At this point, the numbers are painting a clear picture. Drake isn't as elite as he used to be. He's not even competing with the current A-listers, let alone someone like Kendrick who's operating on a whole different level. The gap between them is so massive, and it's only getting wider. The fact that Triple S keeps dropping in streams despite having 21 tracks speaks volumes about its quality. Meanwhile, GNX, which has been out for months, is still making waves across streaming platforms, raking in numbers Triple S can't even compete with. And the wildest thing is that Kendrick didn't even include Not Like Us on the album. Yet that one track alone is giving Drake's entire project a run for its money. When this Triple S album first dropped, it looked like it might shake up the industry in ways that we could never imagine. But it turned out to be a false alarm, and why is that? Well, because fans aren't as gullible as they used to be. They're holding every artist to higher standards now. They want quality music, and this album, it just doesn't cut it. Fans lose interest fast these days, and that's exactly what's happening here. There are way better projects out right now, and people aren't settling for mediocre just because it's Drake. That trick doesn't work anymore. Kendrick already did a hard reset of the culture. The mindset has shifted massively. If we're keeping it real, this album is just not good enough. There's nothing fresh, unique, or even exciting about it. Aside from the handful of tracks where Drake actually raps, everything else is as bland as it comes. Most of the songs are completely forgettable, and that's the problem. They're boring. A lot of listeners didn't even make it halfway through before tuning out and switching to something else. The reality is Drake should have shelved this project and come back with something stronger. He didn't have to release it, even though he announced it months ago. This is not the album you drop after getting bodied by Kendrick. People expected Drake to return firing on all cylinders, hungry to reclaim his throne. Instead, this is what he delivered. And that's why this album is flopping so hard. To be honest, there isn't much difference between this Triple S album and For All the Dogs. In terms of quality, they're both mid, but back then, Drake was still the industry's golden boy. He knew how to promote an album in a way that kept people talking. For All the Dogs had a lot of terrible songs, but at least it had a few that got people rocking. This Triple S album, it's just depressing. It lacks energy, vibrancy, anything that could make it a real topic of conversation. Drake really has lost his mojo. Who would have thought we'd reach a point where people are seriously discussing Drake's fall off less than a week after dropping an album? And yet, here we are. After everything that's happened, especially with this project, there's no denying it. The fall off is real. The invincible run is over. Drake no longer has that aura that makes the masses rush to his music. There was a time when other artists would push their release dates just to avoid competing with him. Those days are a distant memory now. The fact that SZA's deluxe album is outperforming Triple S tells you everything you need to know. Apart from Nokia, which seems to be pulling a bit of wave, this whole album is just one big, chunky mess. Drake could do without it. It's pretty wild that the biggest conversation around Triple S isn't even about the songs. It's about the end of Drake's dominance. There's a difference between an album being good but underperforming and an album being boring. Triple S is both, except for the good part. If this had dropped a year ago, there's no doubt the first day streams would have been higher than the 50+ million it scraped together. But a lot has changed since then. It's going to be very interesting to see how this album performs in the next few weeks. It's make or break for Drizzy. His fans are already scrambling for excuses, pushing the same tired narrative, but the reality, the gap between Drake and Kendrick has never been wider, and Drake isn't closing it anytime soon. Remember when GNX dropped? It commanded everyone's attention. One listen and you were hooked. From Luther to Squabble Up, every single track hit different, and people couldn't get enough. They still can't. But you see this Triple S album? Just one listen, and people don't want to come back. And honestly, who can blame them? There are way better projects out there right now to listen to. With the way things are shaping up, Triple S is on track to become the biggest flop of Drake's career. If he truly wants to get back to being a dominant force once again, the music needs to evolve. It needs reinvention. It needs hunger. Until then, Drake is going to keep flopping hard. So what do you think about Triple S's low streaming numbers? Are you surprised it's this bad compared to his previous releases, or did you see this coming? Let us know in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because if there's one thing we know about Drake, the drama never stops. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.